Well, good evening, everyone. It is 6:30 p.m. on Wednesday, April 20th, and I will call the workshop to order. Let's start with a roll call.
Okay. Obi,
Here?
Ellis,
Yes.
Francie, Gagan, Catchman,
Here.
Lawrence,
Here.
Mackey,
Here.
Morrison,
Here.
Pericini,
Here.
Ross,
Here.
Shaw,
Here.
Taylor, Shave.
Here.
Thank you.
Also, so everybody knows, before the meeting, I did receive regrets from council members Francie, Taylor, and Gaken. There's a few people that are out ill, and I think somebody else had a conflict, so everybody knows. I did hear from them in advance. Chief Hubbard, would you like to introduce our guests and go over our topic tonight?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you very much. Tonight, Eric Shearer of TCA Architecture will be presenting our feasibility and design study that we worked on, and I was just going to kind of do a brief update on the timeline leading up, and then we'll hand it over to Eric. So just by way of introduction, those that don't know, I'm Tom Hubbard, the current fire chief for the Aberdeen Fire Department. In December of 2020, TCA Architecture was awarded the contract to perform the design study for the fire station. We had a competitive process for qualifications, and TCA was chosen by the fire department, and we began the process. The original budgeted amount for that project was $40,000. As soon as we started getting into it and had site visits from Eric and had further discussions, we realized that as proposed, it would get us so far, but not far enough. So in February of 2021, we came back to the council and requested additional funds to achieve a complete project, not to exceed $100,000. So thank you to the council and the mayor for approving that. That allowed us to arrive at what you will see tonight is a completed project, and Eric can talk more about what that means. October of 2021, the project was completed and we received the final results, which will be presented to you tonight. The complete study is a very large file, and some of you have already requested it's on a Google Share Drive, and some of you have requested to see that. If it should be in your email, if you want to see that, then there should be a way for you to request that. I know I just granted access to somebody tonight. So without further ado, I'll be sharing the screen. Eric will be presenting. I'll let him sort of give his background. Just know that TCA has been very involved in fire station, fire facility design across the Pacific Northwest and regionally. We were very pleased to work with them. They were very tuned in to what our needs were, understanding what our demand is, our call volume, our local challenges. And with that, I'm going to see if sharing the screen works. What I'm not sure is, as we go through, I guess, help each other. If someone has a question, speak up, raise your hand. When I'm sharing my screen, I'm going to have limited access, but we will do our best. So, does everybody see a large slide?
Yes.
All right, Eric, with that, I hand it over to you.
Okay, thank you, Chief. As the Chief mentioned, you can go ahead and go to the next slide, Chief. TCA was very fortunate to get this project, and we've had a lot of fun with it. It's been great working with the fire department. They've been super helpful in walking through this with us over the past couple of years. As the Chief mentioned, we've been doing fire stations. I joined the firm in '94, I think it was. The firm was doing them before that. It's just kind of our niche. So we've started to get calls from other architects all over the country to help their architects do these as well. So just a quick brief on that. I've got a lot of slides that I'm going to go through. I hope it doesn't bore you. I've got kind of a process in my head that I went through with the chief on sort of just trying to let you guys all know how we went about doing this, the steps that we took. And I'm cutting a lot out, believe it or not. After you get done with this, you won't think so, but I'm cutting a lot out of it. The process that we went through to get where we got. So hopefully by the end of this, you'll have at least a rudimentary understanding of what we did. So go ahead, Chief. As I mentioned, we've done a lot of stuff all over the place. Fire, you know, I always tell people, it's kind of funny, there's a magazine for everything. Fire districts are no different. There's a Firehouse magazine. I'm sure there's a bunch more. We write articles for these all the time. We've got a conference coming up that's in Chicago this May, where we give speeches there, and we actually help other fire departments sort of understand what their projects are for free. It's kind of a donation thing that we do. Next. This is the team that we worked with. Myself, far left, Mike Armstrong's our structural engineer, John Schaefer, mechanical, Ken Wardhell was electrical, Dan Cassidy was our cost estimator, and then Marcus was doing the soil testing, geotechnical engineering stuff. He ended up not ending up doing a whole lot, because I'll talk a little bit about this because of the site selection process that we ended up going through. And then civil engineer Todd, and then Caroline for landscape. Next. So as I mentioned, the purpose of this is to go through a process that we went through and how we came up with the conclusions and the design that we did. Next. So generally, this is what we're going to do this evening. I've got laid out kind of the task one there is like the evaluation of the current situation that you guys had, the current station, what the current trends are in the fire service. We talked to the fire department about that, and that's a fun process because we sit down, we understand what they know. We can give them some information on what we've learned from other fire departments, not only locally in Washington State, but around the country. And then we go through a process to develop the spaces based on their needs, and then come up with some designs based on the parameters that we understood. And after that, you guys, basically where we're at is that we need to find a site, or you need to find a site that you're going to put these on, and then outreach to the community to make sure that everything that you guys are doing. And again, that's kind of you tell me, right? Or whoever the architect is that does this for you, what sort of information that you want to provide to the public and when, if that makes sense. Go ahead, Chief. So the first thing, as I mentioned, that we do is we meet with the fire department, we go to the stations, we understand what you have and have a conversation. What's working now? I mean, clearly it's an operating fire station. They've been there for what, Chief? I think 56 years, something like that. Or excuse me, 46, not 50. I can't remember the number. But anyway, that comes up in a minute. I'll tell you. But that's kind of the process we went. Is we went to each of the stations and walked around and talked about it. Next. So the headquarters, everybody I'm sure knows where this is, but that's kind of what this slide was about. North of the river. We talked about what site constraints there are currently, understanding, and this wasn't really try to solve problems at this point. It's like, we just want to know what's there. We want to understand what you have, and then talk about things that have impacted the facility. For example, there might be some decaying concrete. We know the earthquake affected both stations. You know, there's just all kinds of things that we're going to go through. I can mention a few of them as we go through this. that the stations are impacted by age, of course, and inadequacy of current trend. Next, Chief. The South Aberdeen Fire Station, and this is the priority station for the department. So that's why I put that in bold green up there. It's my understanding if nothing else happens, they really need this one the most. So that's why that's there. This is a smaller station, of course. 1966, there's the number I was looking for that I couldn't remember. So both stations were built about the same time. This one has 3 bays. It's actually only operating with 2 because there's workout equipment on one side of it. There's lots of things happening with both of these stations that are showing age. I just listed a few of them, you know, the paving, the apparatus have to back in, the front apron's very short. So by the time they clear the bay, they're already in the street, which is not something you really want to do if you can help it. Low ceilings, the apparatus doors and the ceilings in the bays, very short compared to a normal station these days. And so the fire trucks actually have to be ordered and put together in such a way that they can fit in there. Next. I wanted to talk a little bit about this. It kind of scared everybody a little bit when we started this, but it turned out to be fine. So it was an educational process for, I think, everyone. Our engineers got very involved in this, ended up talking to the state. We ended up having a couple of meetings with them, and the code changed in the middle of doing this report, where they increased all of the tide lands and all of and the requirements. So essentially what they were telling us is that where you see the yellow on the screen there could potentially experience a 9-foot wave if the tsunami was, you know, triggered by a large enough earthquake. So that was a little surprising to me that it came in that far, and the impact. And you can see where the fire station is there, and from the arrow, it's definitely in that zone. Next slide, Chief. This is just showing the map of where the South Satellite Station is. And again, it's right next to the river. There is a wall there to protect it from flooding, of course, but this was the impact zone to that 9-foot wave. So as I mentioned, last May, nearly a year ago, while we were working on this, the state adopted the new standards. And so we were like, okay, so are you serious? We have to try to design a fire station in Aberdeen to withstand a 9-foot wave. And essentially, after we went through all of this with them, they said, no, even though it's categorized as a 4 for a tsunami, they are allowing the local jurisdictions to just make that decision themselves, whether or not they really want to do that. It would nearly be not impossible, but it would be very expensive to try to design a fire station to withstand a 9-foot wave. You'd have to build a wall around the site. The other interesting thing about this is that once the water comes in, it leaves after that. And so it's also going to be dragging things with it. And so you have impacts of even a car slamming into your building and things like that. There's all kinds of stuff that could potentially happen. We had some very good open discussions, not only with our engineers, with the state folks, and also the fire department. And I know, Tom, do you want to chime in a little bit on this, kind of what your guys's feeling was on that? I don't want to misquote you.
So, yeah, and it definitely was, as we were moving along, and all of a sudden we were getting contacted by DNR, which holds the keys to the kingdom on all these type of maps. And Karina, I can't remember her last name, but very receptive, really good discussions. There really isn't an option to build what we need higher and still maintain response times and zones and things like that. And because we can go into a class 2, the decision was made that, and because of our standard operating procedure, that following a large earthquake, we will be evacuating to higher ground along with everybody else. And that was their key thing. Other facilities, and I'll let the police when they finally present. They're in a little different category because of their correctional facility. They'll have to meet a higher standard. But we looked at how do you construct it to meet a 9-foot wave? Do you build it elevated? Do you build it on pylons? What do you do with the apparatus? And Eric was right. You're almost essentially doubling your construction costs and still not guaranteeing. Because if you put a large deflection wall on the seaward side of this building and it wraps around, we all know what happens with a tsunami, it's going to go back out to sea. So the deflection wall, while maybe from the initial impact, you're still going to suffer catastrophic damage. So we were able to work with the DNR and Eric with his construction people and mechanical engineer, and it'll be a very resilient building. And the design is to move sensitive stuff up above if possible, but we're very comfortable with what we came up with.
Great, thanks, Chief. You can go to the next slide. Again, as I mentioned, that was a very interesting process we went through. We talked about it for, oh gosh, it was probably 2 or 3 months. We went back and forth on what we were going to have to do. And the outcome of that basically came out that we didn't really need to do anything. Fire stations are still category 4 in terms of earthquake design. So when you design a new station or do upgrades, they're essentially the last thing standing, as I always trying to say, because they are the emergency responders. And so let's assume you didn't have a tidal wave, the building would still need to be able to get the apparatus out of it in an earthquake to respond to your community and things like that. So kind of going back to the approach that we took, what were the takeaways? So we toured the building, as I mentioned, had a lot of good discussions with the fire department and actually the city. I didn't mention that previously, but you guys as a city has been very helpful in us understanding some of the codes that we needed to talk about, location of the building and where that might go. So it's been a great process from my perspective in teamwork to go through this process. So we started looking at, okay, so we've got some fire stations. What are they missing? What are some of the key things? There's some obvious things, clearly, given when they were built, advancements in technology nowadays. I mean, here we are, right? COVID kind of caused this, but we're all able to get on a computer and have meetings now. It's almost a little too easy. I don't know if you guys have run into that now, but it's like if we're having multiple meetings a day now. We never used to do that. A big thing that's coming down all over the country, sustainability. That's lowering your utility bills, understanding what's coming. We've got projects now that are putting in electric car plug stations in the parking lots. We've got stations that are at least, if nothing else, running conduit to the roof and engineering the roofs to handle solar panels at some point, even if they're not doing it now. We've designed fire stations that are, in fact, some of the most energy efficient in the country. And that was the goal of the department. It's expensive to do that, but that was their goal. So we do have a lot of experience with that. Operational improvements. The point of this, when Tom and his crew get a call that there's an emergency, no matter where that crew is in the station, we look at response paths. So if they're asleep, they're going to have to get up, potentially use the restroom, either go downstairs, down a hallway, get their gear on and get in the apparatus very quickly. And then during the day, if they're in the day room or they're even outside doing something, they've got to be able to get in and get in that apparatus and get out of the station in a hurry. So there's a lot of design that goes into looking at how a plan is laid out. We looked at it here with these existing stations and talked about what crew needed to do to be able to respond, things like that. The other trend that's been happening in the last, I'd say, more so in the last 10 years than I've ever seen it, and that is really taking a hard look at healthy environments for the crew. There's a lot of talk and discussions about firefighters and emergency responders and getting cancer and the things that they're exposed to. And so we take a look at how can we mitigate that. We obviously can't do anything about the fact that an emergency responder firefighter has to walk into a burning building. I mean, that's just part of the job. But when they come back and they have that material on them and on their clothes, what can we do in the building and how they return and what they do to keep those contaminants out of their living space and keep them honestly from going home to their own families. Material advancements, and again, some of this stuff's pretty obvious. There's much better equipment nowadays for just about everything. Washer, dryers, stoves, just about everything. The building codes are quite a bit. They've gone through, I don't know how many different iterations since these buildings were built. And so the fire stations of today are much different in even ways that you can't see. So as I mentioned, the structural engineering of these buildings is much more stringent. They're able to withstand a higher level of earthquake. They are able to hold the energy in. So if you're heating and cooling the inside of your building, it's much cheaper to do it now because of the envelopes that are being designed. Next slide, Chief. So normally what we would do is we start talking about the needs assessment and what the fire department actually needs to do in their new facilities. But I wanted to quickly run through some of the stuff I was just talking about, which is kind of the current trends in the fire department, just so you guys all have an idea of what we talked about when we met with the fire department, to just let them know what's going on out there. What are the things that you might consider doing when we start the design? Next slide, Chief. So I mentioned response, turnout. What are they doing? You know, what gear do you have? How do you want this station to operate? We've done studies with other departments in actually tracking time. So if you get up and you have to do certain things, how long does that take you? How long does it take you to put your gear on and get in the apparatus? How can we help with that from a facilities perspective? Next.
All right, Eric, I was just
Go ahead.
going to add to that.
Yeah.
There is NFPA guidelines on what we call turnout times, and it's different for emergency medical. It's a minute or less from the time we receive the dispatch to the time we're going out the door. For fire responses, because as you see on the slide, we're putting on our turnout gear, it's 2 minutes. So no matter what time it is, whether it's 8 in the morning or 2 a.m., when the tones hit, you either have 60 seconds or 2 minutes to get out the door, and we track that. The rating bureau tracks that, and it's a standard that we report on in our annual report.
Thank you, Chief. The healthy in, healthy out concept I mentioned, this is I'll say relatively, we've been doing it for probably 10 years, but there's a lot of departments that are not familiar with how this operates, depending on how old the facilities are and how sophisticated the department might be. And again, controlling those contaminants. When someone comes back from a call, it could be just something, you know, I was talking to Chief Hubbard about this as well. My nephew's an EMS guy down in Vegas, and he holds back on the stories, but you know, he's had to step in a few things when you go to a call, and even though he's not fighting fire, he's coming back. He'll try to wash his shoes off before he gets into things, but you certainly wouldn't want to wear those boots inside your house when you get home. And so there's just things that we want to provide, airlocks, places for people to wash off their boots, places for people to wash their hands, and then sort of identify those spaces as we start designing the facility. Where are those? Where's the most convenient place that someone's going to be able to do that? Because old habits are hard to break. And if we want to make it as easy on the department as possible to get the crew to do something. So if there's a hand washing station right near the door that they have to go in, then that's going to be better, we assume, to get somebody to wash their hands or use a sanitizer station. You'll see them all over the place now. COVID has changed a lot of that. We've started redesigning how lobbies are designed now just because of COVID. So it's just kind of interesting. Things come along. We'll talk a little bit about that in a minute, about adaptation too. Next slide, Chief. The other thing in terms of health, wellness is something that seems very simple, but sleep health. You can imagine, as you probably know, these guys are getting called all day and all night. So you get woken up at 2 o'clock in the morning and then you don't get back until 4:30. You've got to be able to have good sleep or you're just not going to be able to function appropriately. And so how can we better get it so that the crew can sleep better? Well, one of those things, pretty simple. We started putting the lockers outside of the building, outside of the sleeping room. So if somebody comes on shift and they want to go work out or get their gear or something, they don't have to go in and wake the other person up. So there's some simple things like that. Downtime, kind of preventing firefighter, emergency responder burnout, giving them places to just go hang out where they can decompress. It could be that they just came back from a really bad call and they just need to go hang out. And so you'll see fire stations, almost every single one of them. They have interior day rooms, they have outdoor spaces. They live there. It's kind of their house for a few days, and then they can go home and then they come back again. So there's a considerable amount of time as an emergency responder that you spend at these facilities. Next slide. There again, you can see on the left-hand side, those lockers being outside the room. On the floor plan that we'll show you later, we ended up putting them around the perimeter of the hallway. So it spread them out a little bit and saved some square footage. The slide on the right is an example of an airlock. So you can see the fire truck in the background there. You come in there and it gives you a space to wash off your boots or something else you have before you get into the station, which is kind of the door you're staring at right there. So just make it as easy as possible, as convenient as possible to rinse off what you need to rinse off, and then change your shoes potentially. Next slide, Chief. So as I've been talking, best practices, trying to understanding what you guys are going to do to facilities potentially. So we've done this quite a bit with other departments, Pasco, some of those places recently, where they know they're going to do more than one station and trying to standardize things. So if your maintenance person has to go buy a light bulb, it's going to be the same light bulb no matter what station you're at. So you don't end up having to purchase all these different things. I was just talking to the chief at Eastside Fire and Rescue. They just took over the Woodinville stations and we had a discussion about that. So anything that they're renovating in the Woodinville stations, they're going to try to get it in the same way so that the maintenance person doesn't have all these different things that they have to do. So you guys have a unique opportunity, even if one station's built before the other one, is to start thinking about what are some of those things that we can standardize, even if the buildings look different from the outside. There's going to be a lot of similarities. Chief, you can chime in on this too, but most departments, depending on what's going on, there's a possibility that a crew member might work at one station for a little bit and then have to go to the other one. I think that's happening with you guys a little bit, was it not?
It's happening all the time. We rotate our people between headquarters and south side. The captains will spend a month or two at headquarters and then rotate south. Same with the engineers, and then the firefighter and paramedics are bouncing all the time. So
yeah,
standardization would be critical so that we're not confusing people.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. And that was my main point with this slide. Thank you. You can go to the next one. I mentioned too, also, this is up to you. I've been in a department one time where the chief, for various reasons, and he had good reasons, he didn't want to tell anybody they were building a fire station in this particular spot because he didn't want to freak anybody out. Well, the sign went up and we had a public meeting and, you know, we had to face the music. So there were a lot of upset people that they felt like they weren't informed appropriately. So that's not really on us. I can only, us and the fire department and you guys as a city have to make that decision. But we've had a lot of experience with sitting down with the public, having some fun meetings where we stick up little tabs on, what does everybody like to see? We'll say, okay, well, this is the site that had to be picked and there's reasons for that and we can explain that. But what do you want the outside of this? Well, what color do you want the fence? Because there's certain things that you can do with the public that you don't really want the public designing the inside of the fire station, but if somebody wants a white fence versus a brown one, they want certain kind of vegetation or potentially or some things like that. We found great success in communicating with the public about what they can participate in. And then they feel a part of the process. So it works out really well. Next slide. So kind of future proofing, talked a little bit about that. So you never really know, like we couldn't have predicted COVID, but we try to think about what can you do in the station to make it adaptable. A lot of times, one of the bigger things is to try to leave space on one side of the apparatus bay, because that way in, 20 years from now, 30 years from now, even though that seems a long ways away, boy, I wish the architect and the city and the fire department had left room for us to add another apparatus because the city's grown so much. We need to add another aid car, or maybe there's some kind of other vehicle that hasn't even been invented yet. That they find that they need to put there. And so we try to design these things so that it doesn't cost any more money, but it leaves the facility adaptable. As we just talked about, organizational change. It could be that, I've had departments that I've been talking to that all of a sudden now, that instead of having 3 people at the station, they have 4 or 5 because they've added an aid unit or something else has happened. So again, it's just about looking for ways to make sure that we don't box everybody in so that there's no adaptability to the building. Next slide. These are the things that we don't really have any control over. So it's like all the codes we need to make sure that we apply to, and we know what they all are. We understand what these are. There's WAC 296, 296. Oh my gosh, I cannot believe I just forgot that. 296-305. Is that right, Chief? Oh my gosh, I thought I had that memorized. Anyway, there's state codes too, not just the federal ones like NFPA that we have to follow. There's new energy codes. The energy code just got increased this last year as well. So there's certain things that we have to do now with the outside of the building and the envelope that we didn't have to before. Most of the time we did it anyway, but now we have to. So there's things like that. Slip resistance is required, and we can't let people fall down in the bays. So there's certain things that we have to do with the concrete in the apparatus bays, things like that. Thank you. Next slide. Okay, so now finally, after all of that, so we got together with the department. You can go to the next slide. And said, okay, so we understand what you have. We understand how it's operating. We understand what the deficiencies are. We've had discussions about trends in fire service design and all of that kind of stuff. And so, Chief, fire department, what do you need? What do you want to do with the new one? You're starting from scratch. Let's talk about what's going to work for you moving into the future. And so that's what this is, a little small piece of the report that we put together. But we did this for all the different spaces that we thought we would need in the building, and came up with square footages based on our experience and trends and what the needs of the department were. And so we put one of these together for each of the facilities. So if you can go to the next. So anyway, before you do that, sorry, if you could back up. We came up with 27,900 square feet for the headquarters. That was the number that came up based on all of those needs. So you can go to the next slide. Again, the priority station, the south station, that ended up being about 12,135 based on calculating all of those needs. That was the number that we came up with. Next slide. So then we take all of those needs and we say, okay, so there's an office. It needs to be, 125 square feet or whatever it is. What is that going to look like? And so you can go to the next slide. So we develop these little diagrams before we even start putting a floor plan together. because we want to concentrate on what do you really need in that space. And so we'll do this for every single space, including closets and bathrooms and everything in the building. The one in the middle there, for example, is the apparatus, so we talk to the department about what sort of apparatus do you need? How big are they? How are they going to get stacked in the building if we do a stacked station? Which ones need to go out first? Can some of them go out the back? Can some of them go out the front? We don't really understand yet about the site or anything. We're just trying to provide spaces that are going to meet the needs of the department. Next slide. And so South Station, same thing. These are just some examples. The bay was decided to be, it could only be 2. It only needed to be 2, I should say. Leaving room in the back for expansion and potentially other apparatus. And there's that sleeping room I was talking about right in the middle there. In that particular case, we just showed the lockers right outside the room because that's what we were shooting for. And then we talked about kitchen and dining and day rooms and how those were going to be put together. Some stations, they're all one big room. In talking to Tom and his crew, we decided that they didn't want those all in one big room, that they needed some kind of separation between the kitchen and where the chairs and the day room is going to be. And so that's how we ended up doing it. Next slide. So sites, that's a tough one, right? Because you don't really want to go tell somebody you're going to knock their house down. You don't really want to go tell a business they have to move. And you're in an urban area. There's not a lot of space. And so essentially what the process was for this is that the department in the city kind of had an idea of where this might go. And so we sort of very loosely made some assumptions about where a site might be, even though that was not going to be public or even decided upon. And so what we decided to do was just kind of make an outline of what we thought the site might be, because we had to come up with something so that we could put the plan together and have an exercise on how this might be designed based on that. Chief, I don't know if you want to chime in anything else other than that, but it was actually pretty that simple. So,
Well, I think it'll probably come up, but site location has not been determined for headquarters or south side. That has to be part of the master strategic planning of the city. That's probably one of the main reasons we're presenting tonight, is to get it on the list that we need new facilities. Those of you that have come down and tour, I know Mr. Lawrence came down, and I appreciate that. And anyone who hasn't been inside the station, make an appointment, and I or Assistant Chief Golding will be glad to show you what we are currently dealing with. But I'd love to say we've identified a site. We haven't, and we weren't in a position. I asked early on, where are we on that, and was not given direction. So I'll just give it back to Eric.
Yeah, and so I wanted to explain all of that because if you look at the headquarters generic site plan, it's kind of, why did you do that? Why didn't you just make a square? Well, it was because it was kind of loosely fashioned after a specific spot, and then it didn't really matter anymore. And so we just kind of kept with that just to go through an exercise so that we could understand how we might lay out the parking. And again, the same exercise would happen no matter what site you picked. And so it was a good exercise to do. We learned a lot from each other in sort of understanding what parking would be needed and where it would be located. So no matter what site that you pick, all of those things are valuable and important and can be used from the information that you have in the report. The same thing with the South Satellite Station. That was a little simpler because it's basically a box. And so we laid it out that way, and understanding how you were going to respond to the street. And so when you do go look for a site, is taking these things into consideration. So here we go with the South Station. Where can we find a site that's going to allow us to operate similarly to this? so that we can drive through the station, have parking, have separate access for the public and the crew to park, and keeping them out of those response aprons. Not every station we do, not every station you'll see is separated, but when you get a call and the fire apparatus is coming flying out of the building, they're certainly going to be careful. The first thing they're going to do is operate safely. So they're not going to go charging into traffic without looking. They're not going to run into a car. But if there's a car parked there or trying to back up and, all of a sudden it dies and you can't, get it started again and it's in the apron, then that's a problem for the response. So somebody's got to get out and push the car out of the way. So we do try to avoid having any sort of impacts like that happen. Next slide. So talking again about site selection and what you might want to consider when you get to that point is, again, sort of ranking things. So if you have a site, let's say you picked out 3 or 4 different sites that might be possible, is going through a process of ranking them, because how are you going to decide? Unless it's pretty obvious. And sometimes that happens. It's like, you know what, there's really only 1 or 2 sites that will fit the building that we're thinking of doing. There's only 1 or 2 sites that are going to allow the operation to occur. There's only 1 or 2 sites that are in the response zone that it needs to be in. Because certainly that'd be great. You guys just go 20 miles away. Let's just put the station there. The land's cheaper and stuff. But then, the chief can't do that, because then the response times and supporting the community don't work. So you have to be able to have a process by which, why did you pick that site? And then it gives you a defensible process that you can show to the public. If somebody comes up and says, well, why didn't you pick Frank's site down the street? He's selling his house. Why didn't you guys do that? Well, it's like, well, then you already have something you can show. Well, it's like, well, because XYZ. We went through a process and understood where our response needed to be and what we needed to have. And you can have some fun with it. The slide on the left is just one way of doing that, where, you get together as a group and people get red and green dots and they say, I hate this, I like this, I hate this. I was talking to you about getting the community involved before. I was in a process like that, where we had all of these different images of fire stations and other things too. It wasn't even the fire station. And there was one particular board where there were green dots all over it. And so we asked the public that was there, it's like, well, raise a hands. Why did you like this one? And it was because it had a white picket fence in front of it. That's why they picked it, because it was a community that had a lot of horses. It reminded them of the fields of horses. So guess what? The fire station we built had a white picket fence in front of it, and it made everybody happy. And so you just never know. It's a great way to kind of have some fun with picking some sites out. Thanks, Chief. That you can go to the next one. So now we go to taking those spaces that we went through the needs assessment. Now we have all those diagrams. So let's turn them into floor plans. So you go to the next one. So we take all of those little spaces and we put them together like little puzzle pieces. We meet with the department. We come up with a plan. Chief, I think we came up with 5 or 6 different versions of this. And then we decided on this one based on all kinds of different parameters that I've talked about already this evening. And that had to do with response time, getting people separated into the right groups, but still allowing them to be together. So on the right-hand side there, that's kind of the administrative wing, where there's a potential for a public meeting room. It's where all the offices are. We talked about adjacencies. Where's it best to have the bathrooms? I mean, all of those kind of things are super important to make sure that the process is evolving and operates appropriately. Somebody comes into the lobby, what do you want to have happen? Does that person need a place to sit down? Do you want them to be able to go right into a restroom, or do you want to have some sort of control over that? I mean, there's all kinds of discussions like that we had. Same with the crew. If they go into the kitchen and they're fixing some food or something, how do they want that to be adjacent to the day room? One of the biggest challenges on a building this large is trying to get people from the sleeping rooms and other areas into the apparatus bay as efficiently as possible. And at one scheme we had, so where the chief's pointing there, that little wing that goes up, that used to be split into two pieces. We had one on the bottom and one on the top, thinking that we could get some people in, at a shorter distance, but it really spread everybody out. And that turned out to be not what the department wanted to do. And so this was the plan that we came up with. It is very possible, depending on the site that you get or the change of thinking, is that this may end up being a 2-story building. It is certainly big enough to become one. One of the discussions that we had at the very beginning was that we wanted to try to do this without going 2-story for various reasons. There's no elevator. And so it could be, and I think honestly that this probably could be just as efficient, if not more, if we went 2 floors. And when you see the massing of the building, you'll understand that a little bit better as well. Yeah, Tom.
I want to give a shout out to retired Assistant Chief Ritz Malizia, who had a large part in this, and also to Lisa Scott and Chris Koski, who spent a lot of time on this project. But I would be remiss in not saying that one of Rich's constant things was no flat roof, no flat roof, no flat roof, no flat roof. So there you go.
And so what did we do? We came back with a couple of flat roofs. No, I'm just kidding. South Aberdeen Station, we went through the same process, the same stuff I just talked about. In terms of response times, what happens when the crew show up, what do they need to do first? What happens when the public shows up? And I don't think the public's using this building like they would the administrative building. There's not a big, huge meeting room here or anything like that. But sometimes people do come to fire stations because they have an emergency and things like that. And so you always want to make sure there's a space for somebody to come in. It is a public building. I thought this plan laid out really nicely. It's super efficient. I really liked, I was very happy with how this turned out, both from me personally as an architect, but also in how it satisfied all of the different things that the department was hoping to get out of it. So I'm sure it'll morph a little bit over time when other people start looking this over the next year or so. But anyway, that's it for that. And so then we actually, I'm showing this separately, but we actually look at the massing of the building while we're doing the floor plan, because otherwise you're faced with trying to solve a problem and moving spaces around to fit the massing. So even though, you can go ahead and go to the next one, Chief, even though I'm showing this separately, these were being developed as we were kind of developing the plan. And it may not be obvious to you, but as an architect, I'm looking at this going, boy, it was really difficult to try to put a roof on this building, given how spread out it was and the angles that it took. Even though it was a fun challenge and we did really enjoy it, you can see why I think in the end, I was kind of convinced that there's a potential that a 2-story building might actually be cheaper to do and more efficient than doing it this way. But we solved the problem. We got the plan to work. And I think if you did this, it would be fine. But this was one of the things this would be really simple if we were able to do flat roofs. We could do all kinds of just little boxes and make it work, but we knew we couldn't do that. Tom shaking his head, no. So anyway, that was the resolution that we came up with that particular project, is what you see there. And that's about as far as we got with it. We didn't intentionally spend a bunch of time and money trying to come up with dimensioning it, and those are potentially could be hardy panels. We talked about trying to mimic some of the industrialization that Aberdeen has had over its history. We thought about that. We talked to the department about what we want, what the aesthetic of this building might be. So that's kind of why it looks the way it does, and the colors and the materials that were selected. None of this obviously is solidified. It could all get changed. But we wanted to come up with something so that we had pricing, but we'll talk about a little bit at the end and things like that. So that was the solution on this building. You can go to the next one. The South Station, as you can see, similar materials. We talked about that. Having a way to standardize things, including the roofing, the siding type, the doors, all of those things, the hardware would all be standardized. This was a little easier to work with just because of the size of the project, and I think it turned out pretty good. You can go to the next one. For fun, we actually didn't start out to do this. This particular part of this was just added in the last few months. I was talking to the chief. I just decided to, we've got an employee in our office that's super good at this kind of stuff. And so I asked Beth in our office, hey, you want to have some fun? You want to take this building that we had and put it on the site and this make something up. So none of this is based on the trees and stuff you see are not based on anything. It's just to give you an idea of what's possible that you could show potentially the public. You got to be careful about that though. You don't really want to go into a meeting and show them this fire station just like this because everybody's going to think it's done. So you don't want to get everybody upset about that. But this just gives you a little bit more realistic view of what that site might look like. Next one. That's a view kind of coming in to the front of it. So after we did all of that and put the plans together, we had the massing, we told the estimator what materials we were looking at. He went through a process, very detailed one, of what this was going to cost at the time that we did this estimate. So this was back in October of last year that this was put together. Escalation at the time was around 4.5%. It just depends on when these things get bid. Escalation just took a huge jump in the last couple of months, but we're hoping that's going to calm down a little bit. And a lot of that has to do with supply chain. It's really difficult to get metal right now and some other things. So that was the number that we came up with. If you got a contractor to bid the project, the total construction cost line there, the third red line down, shows you that you could expect your bid to be about $20 million or a little more than that for that facility that was designed. He's also got in there the project development soft costs. So that would be things like permitting, design fees, engineering, equipment, things like that, that you would have to buy to put in the facility. Next one. Oh, sorry, you did. So this is the South Station. So same process. And again, in the actual report, the entire estimate is in there. If anybody really wants to dive into the weeds, the entire estimate is in there. I just included a couple of front pages of it for the purposes of talking to you guys tonight about it. This one came in, and again, the bid, if you went out to public bid in October, you would expect this to be about $8,630,000 and some change. So that's essentially the process that we went through with the department. We toured the stations, figured out what was wrong with what you had, tried to come up with some solutions, had discussions about what's going on in the industry today, had very good conversations with the department about what their needs were based on that information, developed some diagrams for that, put some floor plans together and some massing, and then got all of that information processed into an estimate. And so that's essentially the report that we put together for you as part of the preliminary design for your two stations.
Eric, could you go, or Tom, could you go back to the slide showing the cost for the headquarter building, please?
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
I had a question about locations. Were Was there any analysis done to take a look at the current locations that we have and where the calls are going and potentially move the fire station in the future in a certain direction, one or the other? Or was there any need to have the larger fire station maybe be two smaller stations and have a total of 3 in Aberdeen?
So really good question. One of the benefits of doing the RFA study with ESCI is one of the big things they looked at was our system, our operational response, our station locations between Aberdeen and Hoquiam. And that study clearly indicated that both our current stations are ideally situated, and anything within a several block radius is going to give us the same thing. One of the key benefits of the headquarters station right now is it's on Market Street, which is awesome for us going east and west. And then, you know, if we're going up on the hill, we go up to Broadway and up, or we go to Scammell, and it's just really ideally situated. So we didn't want to move too far away from where we are now. One of the things looking at it would be really nice if behind us was wide open space. We could build new and then on a Monday, roll everything across the street but that's not the case. One of the things, and Eric, I didn't see it, for footprint, I believe that the headquarters station is a 2.5 acre site and the south side is a 1 acre site, just as a footprint. I think you would lose efficiencies and response if we split headquarters into 2 stations because we do so much cross staffing. In our headquarters, we have a lead out medic unit, a battalion chief, a fire engine. That fire engine staffs 1 or 2 ambulances. So who are you going to lose? How are you going to meet that efficiency? I don't know who you split up. I think we'd lose that. The south side station currently is maxed out at 3 people, and really it should be 2, but we have 3 there. I really need that to be a 4 or 5 person station, eventually 6, but definitely 4. And I think people know that, and I've seen it, but I made a strategic decision. You'll see our newer fire apparatus, our 2020s, if they are at our south side station and we're rotating them in and out, and with our reserve, they do not fit in that station. That was a conscious decision I made when the apparatus team worked for over a year to design the apparatus. They came to me and said, everything we're looking at will not fit in that station. And Dave, what is the height of south side? It's eluding me right now. It's extremely short.
Yeah,
It's
I don't
under
recall.
12 feet.
It's, I
11
would say
feet.
11, 10, give or take.
Yeah. So what my marching orders to the apparatus committee is, you design an apparatus that is going to serve us for 20, 25 years, because that is how long we keep them. Just know that other agencies are running fire apparatus for 5 years and then changing them out. We don't do that. So I said, you design your fire apparatus for what we do. We fight fires here. We go on medical calls. We run our apparatus. And so they came back and said, we want to go with a ladder rack. That excludes it from going in the building. I said, we needed to replace that station 5 years ago. We're going to design the apparatus as you see fit, because we're going to have it for 20, 25 years. We need to get a station. An option, if this is delayed, is we're going to put up a pole building next to the station so we can get it out under the cover. But that is a decision that I made in consultation with the mayor at the time. But if you designed a fire apparatus that fit in that station, it would have added a lot of money to the build, because they don't build them short anymore. That's just not what they do. Did that answer your question, Katie?
Yeah, and I had a follow-up question about, you said that it maxes out at 3 people. Why is that?
You need to come on a tour.
I was gonna
They
say maybe we
are,
could coordinate some tours for council members that haven't been.
Yeah, absolutely. So the South Side Station, you saw the pictures of downstairs, and Eric, I don't know if it was ever designed for 3 bays. That's news to me. It's never had 3 bays. That's always been a brick wall, but you may have found plans where it was 3 bays. I'm not sure what that was, but upstairs is a very small day room. There's a bathroom, and then there's a hallway that holds 3 beds with no separations. And we've gotten creative with drapes and cabinets and things like that. The kitchen in it, I think you'd call that a galley kitchen on a fishing boat. It's about 3 feet wide by 6 feet long, and it's just outdated. Just talking about outdated stations, our headquarters station, the sleeping area is one large open room where we have put in walls and dividers. The bathroom up until 3 or 4 years ago, with the help of Rick's carpenters, because we have female employees that are firefighters that are here for 24 hours at a time, it was one bathroom with 2 stalls, 2 urinals, and 2 showers, and it was no doors. And so at the time, our firefighter at the time grew up in a large family and said, I don't want anything special, but we actually went in, and with Rick's crew's awesome help, we split the bathroom, and we now have 2 bathrooms with locking doors, because that's just what we need. And that's just a small sign of why we need to upgrade. But I would love to put 4 people at Southside, especially with the impact we're picking up from Causey. But 4 people allows me an ambulance and an engine, much more flexibility. So.
Yeah, Katie, it's Katie, right?
Yeah, Katie.
So small, I can't read it. I apologize. I'm on my little laptop here. I forgot to mention, and I apologize for that. One of the things we did when we went and talked to the department at the very beginning was, what's some of the stuff, why can't you stay here? Can you renovate in place? And as we went through the facility, we realized it is just not deep enough. That we can't get the apparatus to work. There's not enough parking. There's no room for growth. And so it didn't make any sense to try to stay there. So I really appreciate that question, because I skipped over it without realizing it. But that was something that was looked at by the department. I think even before I got there, Chief, you guys had already kind of tried to figure out how you would make that work. And it just wouldn't be possible. The other thing that Tom just mentioned also is we've run into that a lot of times where a department does get lucky enough that they have the room to remodel or build on their new. They have to make everybody leave for a year and a few months. And where are they going to go? You've got some pretty expensive equipment and a job to do that is a 24-hour-a-day thing. So you have to find somewhere else to go. We've had departments move into a house and they leave the apparatus outside. They have to build a carport. It's not ideal. But so being able to build something else in a different site and leave them operational is kind of the best scenario for the department, at least, if that's possible. The other thing you mentioned, Tom, that I didn't bring up was the gender thing. When we were talking about sleeping and sleep quality, the entire country, essentially, any new fire station, and there's exceptions to this, but they're going to individual sleeping rooms because of the snoring thing, being able to get good sleep. And also that in shift changes, you've got, 4 sleeping rooms or 5, and they all share. So somebody comes on shift. That way they can be male or female. The same thing's happening with the restrooms. We don't really have male and female restrooms anymore. We provide single occupant restrooms that has a toilet, a shower, and a sink in it. And that way anybody can use it at any time, which has worked out better for that. So yeah, I agree. Good question. Yeah, Liz.
You're still
Yeah,
muted,
You're
Liz.
muted.
Liz.
Try again. What's the design life of your buildings?
Fire stations, you know, the goal in a new one is to have it be a 50-year building. There's exceptions to that too. We're designing one for a government facility up by the dam, and that supposedly is a 100-year building. So it's all concrete and steel, and that thing's not going anywhere. I don't know that that's all that practical because look what's happened in the last 35 years with technology. Nobody knew that was coming. So you can't really design even for 50 years. I don't think the material itself will last that long. The stations that we're designing are very energy efficient. They're sturdy, they're durable. They'll withstand most firefighter abuse. Right, Tom? So no. So that's a very good question. So I think the short answer is we try to do 50 years and understand that we try to also make them adaptable.
And then my next question is, so I added up the cost for both buildings and we're looking at about $45 million to do both. And how do other communities, especially smaller cities, how do they approach a funding package for something like this?
You know, most of them, and again, Chief, you may know yourself, but most of them try to float a bond. So they'll go out for bonding on that, and then you know there's like what's his name, Jim. Have you guys talked to him yet? Tom, Jim. Oh my gosh, what's his last name? There's specialists out there that can help you with that, Liz, and just talk to you about that process on how and that would be specific to you guys, right? I mean, it's much more not compared to like maybe what somebody else did, but specifically to what they feel your capacity to bond is based on your valuation and things like that. That's how that's done.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Liz, I just wanted to point out that those costs do not include land acquisition. So you have that on top of, I may have said it, I've said it a lot, but one of the things that I'm hoping that this moves forward and rapidly, and I've got a few key points, but what I want to put out there is when the new headquarters station is built, and I tell you the firefighters are eager for that. This current site then is owned by the city of Aberdeen, and it's pretty prime real estate. It's on 101, it's on Market Street. While it's definitely end of life as a fire station, it possibly could be rehab for something else. I don't know about the structural integrity, and Lisa Scott could weigh in on that. But there is an asset sitting here. The Southside Station, there's no asset sitting there. It's got to go. It's right on the highway. I tell you that it's structurally not sound. The property itself, possibly sitting where it is, could be used, but the building itself, no. While I've got the floor, some of the key things that Eric was alluding to as far as the benefits of a new station. It goes to firefighter sustainability and operations. Right now, when the fire tones or EMS tones are going off, and they're going off all the time, they just hit and they go, and depending on the call, if the call is south or north, everybody in every station gets the same tones, whether it's 8 a.m. or 2 a.m. And there's no way to adjust that with our current infrastructure. I will tell you in next year's budget, there will probably be money for a new station alerting system, because the new modern alerting system is by station. So if the south side, if a call is in south side, everybody at headquarters isn't getting jolted awake, and vice versa, because your station may only have 3 calls in the middle of the night, but because the department had 10, you're awake for all 10. Also, in the way that they're coming through, studies have shown that firefighters are getting, for one, pancreatic cancer on the way station alerting is happening, because the way it's hitting, you're dumping adrenaline, and that has been linked directly to colorectal and pancreatic cancer. And so the new toning system is the lights gently come on. The first tones are soft to wake you up, and then alerting. And it sounds kind of silly that, oh, well, they're here to go on calls. There's a lot of science behind this. And, you know, I've had my speaker muted. We've had 3 or 4 calls just during this meeting. I don't really even hear it anymore, but I guarantee you when I was on shift all night long, it's a big factor. And that's just some of the minor benefits of the new systems that are out there. And then also the clean station. We had to put all that in place for COVID as far as one entry and this and that. And so that's all designed in, and engineering solutions are always the answer to improving human behavior. You can tell them to wash their hands every day of the week, but if you put a washing station in front of them, they're going to wash their hands.
Yeah, and let me add to that, Tom, that one of the other things is lighting. So when you get a tone, it used to just blind everybody and scare the crap out of them, and now it's to get your heart rate to go up slower. There's a red light that comes on. It's not so blinding. You can see where you're going, and then it slowly turns into real light. The other thing is that, as the chief was mentioning, like a system like it's called locution, it can be designed pretty simply and it can be designed pretty elaborately. We've got stations where they have a thing that looks like a little stoplight. So if you're working out and you got your headphones on and you're on the treadmill, or you're watching TV or something, the light will come on and it'll tell you what your tone is. So if it turns green and that's you, then you can go. If it turns red, you ignore it. The same thing that you were just talking about, Chief, with calls and everybody getting woke up. You can go into your room and you can log into your little pad on the side of the door that it's you. It knows who you are and what calls you go on. You're only going to get woke up for your calls. And so that's the beauty of that now, is it's really intended to make the systems more efficient and healthier for the people who are working there.
Hey, Chief,
Dan?
will you stop screen sharing?
Yes.
There we go. Dan, did you have,
Dan,
go
you have a
ahead.
question?
Sorry.
Yeah, I know that you guys didn't do this much work without having some serious discussions and thoughts about location. And I'm wondering if we need to plan for an executive session so the chief can share his thoughts on what we ought to be thinking of in terms of next steps, because we're not going to do anything if we don't have a site. And it's clear that they don't want to, talk about it in the workshop, but there must be some thoughts on that. And I would welcome being able to hear about that. My other thought was, if we're going to build in the inundation zone, what does that look like? If we're all going to flee to high ground, but yet everything below us is destroyed, how do we help people? Whether it's an earthquake, if we build an earthquake proof building, yes, it'll still be standing, but everybody around us will be coming to us for help. But if we're in the inundation zone, how do we help people if our building is toast?
So that goes to disaster preparedness and disaster response, and it's no different today than if we were in a brand new station, and same for the police. If we have a cascading event, a 9.0 Alaska Max, as they call it, where we have 15 minutes notice to the coast and 45 minutes to us, our response plan, and everybody on this meeting and all of the public, once the shaking stops for the first time, you need to head to high ground. And that is our plan as well, because there is no time for us. There's no response that we can do. Someone can call 911 and say, I've got chest pain. Right then, it's disaster preparedness and surviving for the next event. So we have every rig that can be driven. If we have people, we'll be trying to go to high ground. If you've watched the Christchurch documentaries and things like that, the roads may be impassable. The whole Aberdeen, West Aberdeen, East Hoquiam, South Aberdeen, the liquefaction is going to be incredible. As in maybe 10 feet or more of drop and then liquefaction. That is why they say you need to walk the high ground. That's why the walking maps were such a promoted item. The idea that you're going to hop in your car and drive up the Hospital Hill, don't do that. That is not recommended. But that is what everybody does. So really, it's going to be us taking what we can carry and going to high ground. We will try and drive. Hopefully we can drive. Once the wave is passed, then it's what we've all planned for. It's search and rescue, it's damage assessment, it's notifying the county EOC that we've got this, we've got that, we've got infrastructure damage, and it's waiting for state and federal resources. And it used to be that they wanted you to have 72 hours of your own go kit. Now that's 14 days of your go kit. So the fact that our station isn't there really will be not a factor. If we can get our rigs out, we operate from our apparatus, because a fire station never saved anybody. It's us, our apparatus, and our equipment. So that's the thought process.
Thank you. That was somewhat of a rhetorical question. I just wanted anybody who might be listening to know that these things have been thought through. So, because it's also like, we've got AJ West over there. We practice walking up Scammell, but after you've got the big one and all the poles are down and the roads are toast, how are you going to get 400 kids up the hill? It's going to be a challenge. And so that just kind of begs the question of where are we going to stage things and all those. So, but my biggest point though is I'm hoping that we can have an executive session to talk about location.
I would welcome that. I would like Lisa Scott to definitely sit in on that. We have ideas. Nothing is been ruled in or ruled out.
Are there other immediate next steps?
I think that's a finance department question and maybe an executive session. I mean, this project that Eric put together is pretty darn concise, and I think it's almost ready to say, hey, let's move forward with this. But it's the financing, and this council has a lot of decisions to make. The police department is just one phase of their study behind us. Their study is going to come back probably fairly close in cost, but a little bit more because of the correctional facility. And then Rick in Public Works has some projects. So I think Councilperson Shaw has been saying for a year now, we need to prioritize and figure out what's our bonding capacity. How do we go after it? Is there grants? Is there federal dollars out there for building critical infrastructure, and who's going after that? That's the big question in front of us.
Is that our next step? Is there someone, we've been well served by TCA and this study, but is that our next step? Finding somebody that can, we've been hearing from the mayor and from staff that even though there's billions of dollars being made available for infrastructure, our current staff is tapped out. Is that our next step? Finding somebody that can help us with this planning? And how do we go about identifying or putting together an RFP for that next step so that we're not left behind as this money becomes available and we can, I saw the mayor nodding his head. Is that something we should be asking for as a council to, I don't know.
I was hoping to have some money from the insurance money to put some city investment into the funding package for this. What we need to do is make that decision about bringing in somebody who can not only oversee putting together a funding package, but go after grants and address grants as well. So what that's going to cost, it's probably going to be a substantial expense just putting together a funding package. But I think our bonding rate is actually pretty good. It's pretty high. I think we wouldn't have any trouble getting being over $20 million bonds.
Well, I confess I haven't waded thoroughly through the capital facilities information that was shared with us, but whether it's one facility or multiple facilities, there are people out there that help public agencies with capital facilities bonding plans so that you can stage these things based on your capacity. And it feels to me like that might be, if we don't have that capacity in-house, it might feels to me like that might be a next step. What do you think, Eric?
Yeah, while I was listening to you guys, I looked up, his name is Jim Nelson. And Chief, I don't know if you know him or not, but there's a few people out there. I know Jim really well just because he's at all the conferences. He does some speaking with fire chiefs and fire commissioners across the state. He's very he helps a lot of different fire departments specifically with financing and helping with bonds and things like that. I can shoot the contact information over to Chief Hubbard if you guys want to just reach out to him, like how best to start working with someone like that. And I realize that, it's like architects sometimes, depending on what the fee is, you have to kind of get somebody on a roster or do an RFP or something sometimes to hire. But I think if the cost is low enough, and again, I'm not an attorney, but I think if the cost is low enough, you can pick somebody off a roster or something like that. But it might be worth, Jim would be happy to talk to you. Just like, here's what the process is. I don't want to misquote that whole thing. He would be the best person to talk to about it.
Well, just continuing on with our agenda, Mayor Shave, did you have anything else to share for Mayor's comments?
The one thing that really stood out for me and what has been an issue with our existing fire stations that really expresses how old they are. And it was mentioned here in this meeting, so I'll just kind of repeat, but is they were never designed for co-ed use. And when Tom explained that, he was being real nice and subtle about the whole thing, because it's really a serious issue, and the city staff really went to, but it's really not a good situation. One of the things I noticed on the new designs is they do have separate rooms for each individual, which is a big plus, but it doesn't just end there. There's all kinds of new technology and items that make the fire department jobs easier, simpler, less stressful, that comes along with new designs that our department has improvised or does not have at all. And so it's really more serious down there than you would think as far as the conditions that they're working in. We have some great firefighters and they deserve better than that. So I'm really glad to see we're moving forward with this now. And we've got this part of the project pretty much complete. And now we just have to put together the funding package and get her done.
Thanks, Mayor. How about council? Any comments tonight from the council on what we've heard tonight? Go ahead, Liz.
Well, I guess we're looking at a whole lot of money that the city will need to somehow budget for. And it will be really helpful to have the police department information in hand as we look at how ambitious we want to be perhaps with the fire department projects. And yet there's certainly some steps that we can be making. I'd really like to understand more about the bonding process, what our capacity is, how that all works, how long it takes to pay off those bonds. So council, I mean, we can be doing our homework on all that stuff. Meanwhile, I certainly like the thought that's gone into coming up with these building designs. And given that they are so expensive, my hope would be that we could put them out of the tsunami zone one way or another, so that they'd really last and be available to help in an emergency as a backup facility. But this has been really interesting. Thank you all.
Other council members, Councilperson Shaw.
Seeing nobody else, I just want to add one last thing. Speaking of tours of our public safety facilities, just a reminder that on Saturday at 10 a.m. there is a tour of our public works facilities. And if you, I don't know if we have maxed out on who all can go, but if you were thinking of wanting to go, contact Rick Sanger and he'll let you know if there's still room.
Yeah, and along the lines of that, Chief Hubbard, would you mind throwing out a couple of dates to council that might be advantageous for a tour for any council members that might want to see the facilities? You don't have to do it tonight.
We'll put something together. Yeah, or you can either come on your own, or if you want to do 3 or 4 at a time, that's fine as well. So we don't violate the quorum rules, but we'll come up with something.
That'd be great. I think it'd be really helpful. Well, I think if nothing else out of tonight, I think everyone now better understands the current situation with the fire department, many of the challenges with the stations today, as well as what we're looking at for the future with our stations. And I think that's a really good start. And as far as city needs, there's a lot of needs. For the city, there are always going to be needs. And so I'm hopeful that as we start to strategically plan our next steps for everything that the city needs, that we see these price tags and look at them as a way where we need to plan for that over a series of years and not get hung up on the fact that all this stuff needs to be done right now and get overwhelmed by it. So I think that's really important in terms of a next step, is to understand that this all can't be solved for tomorrow, but there does need to be a sense of prioritization so that we can continue to move forward on these projects. Were there any other comments from the council tonight? Or I'll open it up to you. I know Director Scott is on the line. If there's anything from anybody
I have
else
one more
or Dave. Yes.
comment. Next council meeting is, there's going to be a executive session at the end of the meeting to discuss real estate. So we could bring this subject up too, if Tom wanted to mention something. Because it's about real estate anyway, so.
Okay. I'm not seeing anybody waving their hands around here looking to speak. So if there's nothing further, I will adjourn the meeting tonight. Thanks,
Thank you,
everyone.
Eric.